Welcome everyone, welcome to the Swindon Spring Festival. We hope that all is well where you are. Now we had hoped to be presenting live events in theatres, libraries and parks in May in Swindon, but that virus and the restrictions trying to contain it means that we can now only have a virtual festival. This virtual session is presented in association with a Swindon writers group called Mum's the Word and a Swindon reading group called Swindon Arts Words. Today's guest author has written a thoroughly researched book titled Why Women Read Fiction. Of interest, I hope, not only to women, but also to men, and in particular to a literature festival organiser. So I am especially delighted to extend a Swindon Spring Festival welcome to Emeritus Professor of English at the University of Exeter, Helen Taylor. Helen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I'm absolutely delighted to be doing this virtual festival, though I wish I too were in Swindon in person.
Well, we were looking forward to welcoming you live, seeing you here live, and even dining afterwards with you live.
Well, I'm sorry to miss that.
No, but well, have you ever been to Swindon before?
Well, I went to Swindon when I was a teenager because my school had a pen friend set up where I was in Birmingham, and my Birmingham school arranged pen friends in Swindon. And we had to go to Swindon one day and meet our pen friend and be shown around Swindon. And then she came back to Birmingham and I showed her around Birmingham. I seem to remember it was raining on both occasions and we didn't really get on. But I was intrigued to see Swindon. And actually, I have intended to come back to Swindon for years to see that wonderful museum and art gallery of yours. So I will do that outside the festival.
Yes, our wonderful modern art collection at the Museum and Art Gallery. And by the way, if you did come back, the festival is always in May and the weather's generally beautiful, so it wouldn't be raining the next time you came to Swindon.
Lovely.
Okay.
I'm sure it doesn't rain all the time in Swindon.
Okay, Helen, now to your book. One of your respondents in the research said that reading is only fractionally less important to her than breathing, but only just. And your book, Why Women Read Fiction. The question is, why do they, Helen? And what does it tell us that they do? Over to you.
Well, this preparation for this book goes back years and years when I was writing a book about Gone with the Wind, which was a novel that my mother gave me. It was her favourite novel. She gave it to me. I loved it. And I started to write a book about it. And, you know, every woman that I met had a story about her particular relationship with that book. They had incorporated it in all sorts of ways into their lives. They had read it sometimes 30 or 40 times. They'd watched the movie dozens of times. They'd often call their cats or indeed their children after characters in the novel. And this never happened with men. Men had often seen the film and liked the film, but with women, it was a real passion. And I started to understand that, as for me, fiction was something that women felt extremely deeply about, that it really mattered to them. It was a matter of life and death. And when I researched this book by sending out questionnaires to lots of readers and talking to lots of women and book club members and women writers, I got all kinds of wonderful responses, women saying that reading was their best friend. It was the love of their life. It was strawberries and cream, you know, the ultimate dish, that it was therapy. And I thought this is really fascinating. And so my book has attempted to answer that question of why we love it so much and why it's such a central part of our lives. So do you mind if I just read, hold up my book. That's what it looks like. Lovely cover, two young women looking over books at each other. And I'll just read you from my introduction. My reason for reading is to live more lives than one. This is a woman who wrote to me and answered my questionnaire. Novels take me to a world I've never been before. From a small house on a street with people I've never met, all the way to another time, another country, another set of values, a strife I've never experienced, a war I've never known, a love or a grief or a problem I've never encountered. So in other words, reading takes you away and gives you a whole other life, a whole other world. Some years ago, novelist Ian McEwan conducted an admittedly unscientific experiment. He and his son went into a London park at lunchtime and began handing out free books. Within a few minutes, they'd given away 30. Nearly all the takers were women who, he claimed, were eager and grateful, while men frowned in suspicion or distaste. And McEwan's comment was, when women stop reading, the novel will be dead. In surveys of UK, US and Canadian fiction, women account for 80% of sales. That is rather extraordinary, 80% of sales. The editor-in-chief of Bloomsbury, Alexandra Pringle, wrote, "The nest of fiction is kept feathered by the efforts of women. The women who write fiction, the women who publish it, the women who buy and read it and discuss it in their book groups." The woman reader, I argue, provides the glue for an informed and literate society. We are the main readers of fiction, the largest market for novels and short stories, for ourselves and our children, and the main buyers and borrowers of fiction. Women constitute the majority of library and book club members. Literary bloggers, audiobook readers, members of literary societies and literary evening classes, literary site tourists, audiences at literature festivals, and bookshop readings. Women are usually the parents and grandparents who read to children at bedtime, teach children to read in school, as well as at home, and take them along to libraries, bookshops, and supermarkets where we also borrow and buy books for ourselves. Through the ages, literacy has been allowed or encouraged in women in order to provide children with reading skills and some rudimentary education. We share fiction with mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends, and chivvy along male partners to literature festivals and readings. The reading group movement and literary blogging have been led and dominated by women. Women disseminate and promote fiction as teachers, librarians, festival directors. You're an exception, Matt, here. It's usually women who are literary directors. Radio and TV producers, and publishing house editors and publicists. We're the gender most likely to go to websites such as BookBub, Goodreads, W.H. Smith's Richard and Judy, Zoella and Zoe Ball book clubs to get ideas for our next read. And yet, when did you last see a woman character in a play, film, or TV drama absorbed in her reading or sharing a book with real pleasure, not just because she was a sad and lonely figure? So, although there have been histories of women's reading, I wanted to ask how contemporary women read. How do they read? Where do they read? What time of day do they read? And how do they choose books? I never knew how women chose books, and I'm still mystified how I choose books. But it's fascinating to talk to women about how they happen upon books. And most of the time they say that they've had them recommended, word of mouth. And word of mouth is a very powerful thing with women readers. They are, as I've said, as I just read from my book, they are given books by their mothers, by their grandmothers, by their godmothers. Women buy most Christmas presents and birthday presents for girls. And so we get into a pattern of going to other women to find out what to read. And then adolescents share books with each other. They talk about books. And certainly adult women talk about books, often just in casual conversations. They say, "Oh, what are you reading?" And they share books. We know that this happens with romance novels. And we know that it happens with erotica, but we don't, but I'm sorry about the telephone. But it's certainly true that women constitute a kind of network of reading, which means that they're always looking to the next book and looking for a female mentor to recommend it to them. And I want to suggest that, and just another little reading from my book, that life stories are defined in a literary way. We identify with fictional figures, and sometimes we see the passage from childhood through adolescence to work, marriage, motherhood, and old age in terms of chapters. A lot of women wrote to me in their questionnaires about the chapters of their lives. A treasured childhood classic or a contemporary novel can be central to defining who we are. And the writer Belle Mooney put this very nicely. She said, "I'm surely shaped by everything I've read since childhood, and certainly see my life in general as an enthralling literary work in progress." So Jackie Kay summed this up very well. She said, "Our lives are mapped by books." And I think for women readers, this is actually true. Now, a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, why are you talking about women? What about men? Men read fiction. Men love reading fiction." Now, of course they do. I know a lot of men who like fiction. And in fact, when I was an adolescent, it was my boyfriends I used to turn to for suggestions of reading, particularly rather sexy reading. Henry Miller was suggested to me by a boyfriend, and I've never quite got over reading Henry Miller and D.H. Lawrence. But men, I think, don't have quite the same sort of friendship networks. I think men probably read in more solitary state than women, and they don't, they'd rather talk about football than books. Even very clever men, even intellectual men, they're sort of slightly embarrassed about it. Whereas I think for women, it's part of the whole sort of tapestry of our lives. The other thing about women readers, which I think is very important, is that they support and love women writers. And I have had lots of conversations with women writers who tell me about the fantastic support and strength they get from their women readers. I know that one woman writer said to me, male writers are treated as intellectuals, women writers as friends. And certainly there is a sense of a real friendship between women writers and women readers. I mean, often because women readers are reading about things that, they've never been able to express themselves, characters that bring to life certain of their own concerns, certain of their own kind of experiences. But it's not just that. I think there is a sense that women readers really like the fact that women writers respond to them very well at literary festivals. They will chat to them when they queue for books, and they feel an identification with them. And I think one of the things that is certainly true about women writers is that they rely on women readers taking them seriously. I can't tell you how many accounts women writers have given me of the fact that their work has been demeaned by male critics who sort of dismiss it as chick lit. A really serious writer like Louise Doughty was described as a chick lit writer, and in fact all her novels are about extremely serious political and social issues. And it's certainly true that publishers have been slow to catch up with this, because they market women's writing often in jackets, book jackets, that are fluffy, what one would describe as fluffy, pale pastel colours, butterflies and bees on the cover, rather than primary colours and strong lettering. And I've noticed in recent months, as women's writing has become more and more prominent, and women writers have become more successful, writers like J.K. Rowling, writers like Hilary Mantel and Margaret Atwood and Bernardine Evaristo, there's more of a sense now, I think, by publishers that they've got to give women and men the same kinds of covers so that they're appealing to both genders. I think the final thing I'd say about women's reading of women's writing is that the two novels that came out of my questionnaires again and again as being the beloved books are Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre. And these are books that I think are about, everyone loves them because they're about very ordinary women. They're about two heroines who are young, poor, they have no wealth, they have really no attributes, they're not beautiful. In fact, they put their foot in it all the time. You know, they're not very tactful, they don't have great qualities, but they are women who have spirit and integrity, and they are loved for that, and they win the rich, handsome hero. So they acquire a tremendous power over powerful men because of who they are. And women love these novels. And so I think that's just an example of two novels that appeal to women readers because they are addressing something we all feel in ourselves. We all feel insecure, we don't feel very attractive. But boy, do those novels give us a sense of the power that we have within. I want to just finish by telling you that my book is peppered with accounts by different women readers of their own reading experiences and their own reading preferences. And I just want to read you an account by a woman called Jane Manley Jackson. And she loves Gail Honeyman's wonderful novel, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. It's been a big bestseller, and she loves this novel. I just want to read you what she says about it. I found Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine very moving, sad, and also incredibly uplifting. It made me realise that I don't always appreciate the richness of my life with friends, family, neighbours, and colleagues around to talk to. But it also made me feel strongly for the main character, Eleanor, whom the reader really wants to have a happier and more interesting, fulfilling life. Reading the book coincided with me getting interested in mindfulness, which involves noticing and accepting aspects of our life and how we feel about them. The book also made me remember small kindnesses can go a long way, and perhaps in our hectic day-to-day lives, we don't always give these things the weight they deserve. And I thought that was a perfect example of a novel for our current lockdown. That reading a novel like that can remind us of what is really important in our lives and what we should treasure. And I think reading fiction is a way of grounding us and giving us a sense of what is important in life.
Helen, thank you very much. And even though your book is called Why Women Read Fiction, you've actually, your last line there is really what I felt most when reading it. And that is that you care about reading and the value of reading and the importance it has for all of us, whether it's to escape or whether it's to find out things. But because your book is called Why Women Read Fiction, I just want to dwell a moment longer on the male-female factor and then move away from that, because I think we're really much more concerned with reading in general than who does what precisely. But you did mention that many festival organizers are women, and that I'm a sort of exception. I mean, at the Hay Festival, they have a man, and in one or two other places. And it occurs to me, both in reading and in organizing, there's this sort of spectrum of gender where we're somewhere along the line, and we have a femaleness in us or a maleness in us, even though in terms of genitalia and that we're different. And so I come to the question of who writes the books? I want to ask you three questions rolled into one. Do women mostly read male or female authors? Are or have most authors been men historically, even though that's changing? And do men carry more of a halo of fame about them than women? And I've noticed in the early days of one of our reading groups, there were mostly women, but they kept choosing male writers. What's going on there?
Well, it'll interest you to know that when I talked to women and asked questions of them about their reading, and indeed talked to book clubs, I would often say, do you read more women than men, men writers? And you know, they often couldn't answer that question. But when they sent me their lists of books, I noticed that there was a preponderance of fiction by women. But, you know, they do read fiction by both genders, and they don't require fiction to be by women. Whereas with men, you know, a lot of men won't read books by women, fiction by women. They think it's going to be light, fluffy, emotional, romantic, you know, all those dreadful words. And so this is, publishers know this very well, and writers know this very well. And of course, it's one reason why women gave themselves pseudonyms in the 18th and 19th century, and why a lot of writers gave themselves initials. I mean, would J.K. Rowling have been quite the success with boy readers if she called herself Joanna? P.D. James, you know, very wisely called herself P.D. And this has quite a lot of power, making yourself seem as if you're not a girly writer. Men started writing the novel. I mean, Samuel Richardson, you know, Daniel Defoe. I mean, the early novels were by men, and they were snapped up by women. Women loved reading them. But as soon as women got into the fiction writing game, women just took off. And of course, you know, some of our greatest fiction writers in the 18th and 19th century, you know, from Jane Austen through to George Eliot, Georges Sand, you know, those writers, they took to fiction like ducks to water, and women readers loved them. I think your third question about the halo effect, it goes back to what I said about men being seen as intellectuals and women as friends. I think there is a halo effect around men. And when people talk about the great writers, our great contemporary writers, you know, they'll roll off the sort of Salman Rushdie, Julian Barnes, Ian McEwan's. They don't roll off the names of absolutely great writers who have and have changed our perception of novel writing. And I think that I think we don't give enough credit to women for making the novel a very important form at the moment. And as I say, I think that people like Hilary Mantel and Margaret Atwood have really been important in reminding us that that women can write novels too, and actually can be the greatest of writers.
No, I mean, I just completely agree with you. And even though I suddenly want to say, again, as I did over festival organizers, I feel slightly the exception in that I find great women writers, and much as I love the other list of males that you gave, you know, Barbara Kingsolver,
yes,
Winterson, I can't put them down. I find them tremendous. So, you know, I think we accept, or I'm inclined to accept, that the remarks you're making are kind of general remarks, generalized remarks, but there are plenty of male exceptions and women exceptions, but generally speaking.
Well, I just think that women need to, I just mean that male fiction writers, there are great male fiction writers, and I love male fiction too, and as do lots of women. It's just that we need to recognize, and women writers are always saying they get far less attention critically. You know, there are far fewer reviews of women's fiction in serious journals, newspapers, you know, literary books, literary magazines. Men get far more space than women. And of course, giving space to a writer is a way of saying, you are important. Yes, we need to take you seriously. Absolutely. So, and I mean, you're talking about literary festivals. Obviously, a lot of women are invited to literary festivals, but I tell you, it's so significant that a lot of women like Rachel Cusk, who is a very fine writer, Helen Dunmore, they have both told me that their audiences are almost completely women, and men don't come to them, whereas women go to hear male writers talk. It's very noticeable. I don't know if it has been in Swindon, but it's certainly noticeable in the big festivals like Hay and Edinburgh.
Yes, no, you're right. It's a preponderance, and I can't talk about the women writers I'm reading at the tennis club, I've noticed, not for men anyway. In your book, you mention something that Hermione Lee said about vertical readers and horizontal ones, meaning that the vertical ones are reading with serious intent to discover something new, and the horizontal ones are reading to escape or something. And you also quote someone called Bidisha, who I didn't know about, who said, women read fiction because their lives are so crappy. So my question to you is, did you find a pattern that women use fiction as a means of escape or as a means of discovery, or neither, or what?
I think both, actually, Matt. I think that we all read at different times, actually at different times of day. A number of women said to me, you know, that they have light, easy reads at bedtime because they're tired. And they prefer to read more seriously early in the evening or in the daytime. Though lots of women told me they don't read in the morning until they've done their housework or they've done other jobs. And I think that guilt about reading in the morning is something which goes right back to even writers like Dorothy Wordsworth, who were told that she had to do chores before she could read. So I think we all need horizontal and vertical reading. Vertical reading suggesting that it's sort of serious and you have to concentrate and you have to focus on the language. You know, like reading Hilary Mantel's latest novel, The Mirror and the Light. You want to give that full attention. Perhaps horizontal reading is when you go to bed with a lighter novel, something like, I'm just looking at my bookshelves, Beth O'Leary's wonderful novel Flatshare, which I loved, absolutely loved it, and couldn't put it down, actually. That's a new bestseller. And it's a very well written novel, but it doesn't have the kind of intellectual seriousness of Hilary Mantel. But it's lovely, and it's comfort reading, and it makes you laugh. And I think that we all need both kinds of reading. And, you know, if we only read serious novels and novels, you know, like Barbara Kingsolver, if we only read Barbara Kingsolver novels, then, you know, we'd be missing out on a lot of humorous and lighter reads. So I think we need both, actually.
I want to push you just a little bit further on that question of what we read and what effect it has. A little while back, I was reading, and somebody came along and said, Matt, I see you're not doing anything. Can I have a word? And I thought, I'm lost in a good book. I'm doing what I want to do. And so the question I want to ask is, and they said to me, you're not doing anything, you're just reading, and they thought that it wasn't a serious activity. And so I want to ask you, can one say that reading one thing is more important than reading another thing? And you know, this notion when parents often say, children or teachers may say it even sometimes, as long as they're reading, it doesn't matter what they're reading, as long as they are reading. So does that hold true for adults? As long as they are reading, it's fine?
Well, reading can be an addiction, but it's much safer addiction than alcohol or heroin. And I think that reading it's not only a safe addiction, if you like, but it's also a great source of pleasure. And I think we must accord to fiction reading that label of pleasure. It is a real joy. And one of the things that this lockdown has produced is apparently a rise in children and adults reading. And I think this is just fabulous, because it means that people have discovered that you don't have to go out to a club, you don't have to go out to a restaurant, you don't have to watch TV. You can sit with a wonderful, simple little book or something on your iPad or your Kindle, and you can go places in your head, and you can be transformed, and you can be challenged, and you can, your imagination is all the time being kind of stretched, whatever you're reading. And people are so snobbish about reading, and particularly about things like romance, actually. I found, it's just extraordinary, the things that critics say about romance and are so dismissive about it. And romance has been terribly important to a lot of women in their lives, not because women believe that there's a handsome hero who's going to sweep them off their feet, but because they need to have a kind of aspirational or utopian reading to think that life doesn't always have to be dreary or mundane or sad. And so I'm totally unsnobbish about reading. I think people should read what they want to read.
That's tremendous to hear. I'm never quite sure about it. Never quite sure. I actually
try a Mills and Boon, Matt, and see what happens.
Well, no, I'm fine. I'm fine with the Mills and Boons. I don't want to name names now, even though I'm really tempted. But I do think that some books do more harm than good, and take people off on a journey that isn't either good for them or anyone else. I'm so tempted to name names, but I won't. In the same way that, you know, one can't say television is either good or bad. They are just different programs on there. And, you know, like a wine, you can decide that one wine tastes good and does you good and another wine doesn't. And I feel it's similar with books and with films and other things. So I'm trying to push you to say some books are crap, but you won't.
Of course, some books are crap, and of course, I'm a literary critic. You know, I read some books and I think this is atrociously badly written. And one of my beefs is how long contemporary novels are. I think they're far too long. You know, I think you can often do something in 200 pages, as say Julian Barnes or Michael Frayn do, that other writers take 400 or 500 pages to do. So no, of course some books are awful, but I think, you know, I too get very worried when I see very violent films, because I don't like violence in films, and I think it can inspire the worst kinds of imaginations. But I think that's true of reading, and I think it's true of TV, but I can't come down on censorship unless something is irresponsibly written.
No,
so
no.
I agree with you that not all books are equal. I'm not saying that at all. And I hope you don't think I am. I'm just saying that I think horses for courses, different reading for different people. And, you know, some people, I mean, if you have an English degree or an English PhD, you're going to be able to read much more sophisticated literature than if you don't. And that seems to me all right.
And but I do think literature can help take you to places. I had somebody come to the festival who didn't look like a typical reader, and, you know, they had scars and things, and they said, all your books do is talk about sex, death, life and relationships like we do down in the pub, only you do it in an organized way. I like it. So it was similar material, but it was done in a certain way. And
that's a great tribute to your festival.
And I'm one of those men, maybe rare, but I am one of those men who likes fiction much more than the other stuff, much more. And I find that fiction is a way of lying to get closer to the truth somehow. In other words, making things up. And for example, when I read Thomas Hardy and dreadful things happen and children die and so on, I find myself strangely informed and even uplifted about the way life is, how tricky it is, how challenging it is, and entertained at the same time, because it's a good story. And it strikes me that one can say fiction is actually as much about finding out about things as it is about escaping. On balance, would you say?
I absolutely agree. I think a lot of people, when you say, why do you read fiction, they say escape. But what does that mean? And I think, you know, the word escape in itself means I want to go away from who I am. And I think that is the thing, that is the central thing about fiction. I am, with all my limitations, all my limited perspectives, the life that I lead, I can't lead more than one life. And what fiction gives me is a way of getting away from that. And of course, as soon as you get away from yourself, you read about people of different races, different ages, different genders. And you suddenly have to understand them, because that's what fiction makes you do. You have to empathize with them. You have to get inside their head. You have to understand what's going on. And surely that understanding is something which fiction gives us, which I think is absolutely invaluable. And so, I mean, a lot of discussion now about fiction as therapy for people who are stuck in various kinds of mental illness. And I think it's a wonderful way of helping people to get out of their own locked in minds and locked in hearts, to see the world, to take a journey, as they say, to take a journey into other places, other lands, other people's experiences.
Helen, that's a lovely note on which I'm afraid we have to end. But I want to tell you, if you hold up your book so that people can be reminded of why women read fiction, and this is a book I almost said you can get at your local bookshop, but that it won't be open, but you can get it online. You can get it online. I know it's available online. And had you come to Swindon, Helen, to close your session, your live session, I would have presented you with a book, because I have a copy of your book, and I would have presented you with a book that is set in Swindon, and that is about the importance of reading and the pleasure of reading and what reading brings to you. And it's called A Saint in Swindon. It's written by an author who's not from Swindon, called Alice Jolly. And it was the product of a process with reading groups. So it ticks all the boxes that I think Helen Taylor would be interested in.
Oh, wonderful.
So this little book called A Saint in Swindon by Alice Jolly is not only available, folks, to all of you online and so on, but it's winging its way in the post to you. And when you've read it, you can decide whether you want to come back to Swindon. Oh, I'm sure you will anyway.
I certainly want to come back to Swindon. So I hope that we will meet one day in Swindon.
Helen, thank you very much for talking to us about why women read fiction.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Until we meet again, everyone, keep well. And Helen Taylor, thank you very much. Keep well. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching this virtual session at the Swindon Spring Festival of Literature and the Arts 2020. We do hope you enjoyed it. And we also hope that you will join us for the rest of this virtual festival. Here for you are details of the author you have just watched, their book, and our online information. Thank you very much for joining us, and keep well till we meet again.